Here. Sorry for the problems I caused earlier. So I'm going to talk on large bore, super large bore mechanical thrombectomy. We all know that the first pass effect, which is the ability to open up a blood vessel on the initial pass, leads to a greater odds of a better outcome. The trials that have compared the tools that we have, which are stent retriever, as well as aspiration, and then the combined approach, all show that these are effective and safe. Interestingly, one of the trials, ETIS, showed that the combined approach, which has really been one of my favorite approaches for years, had an increased incidence of symptomatic or intracranial hemorrhage, as well as morbidity. So given that when we look at aspiration, we know that it works, that it's safe, that it's fast, and that it's cheap, many have reasonably questioned whether aspiration represents the optimal balance in terms of achieving our goals of ideally getting a first pass effect. And so companies crashed the penumbra aspiration party and started a migration to the development of larger, large bore aspiration catheters. And, you know, we saw some big changes in the field, you know, with ADAPT, when it first started being reported on and developed, and we started getting clinical experience. We were essentially seeing in the literature and in our tables a time of about 37 minutes from puncture to recanalization. And with these larger bore catheters, we could see the power of them. Here's a patient with a middle cerebral artery occlusion. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out my laser. I think I'm just going to talk about it. There's a middle cerebral artery occlusion at its origin. It's a 51-year-old male. We puncture at 1600 hours, and we do a single pass. I think this was a Jet 7 aspiration catheter, and 17 minutes later from puncture, we have recanalization. So, you know, this patient did very well, and we're starting to see the power of this technique in both of its speed and its efficacy. At the same time that we were developing these large bore catheters, we made an evolutionary step to 088 guides for distal intracranial access. Thank you. There we go. So we made an evolution to these 088 guides for distal intracranial access. We could put these very, very high. We could be above complex tortuous vascular anatomy, and this allowed us to provide more support for the delivery of these large bore thrombectomy catheters. So here you can see an 088 supporting an 071 or 070 catheter, which is in a middle cerebral artery. What this also did was it decreased the pull length from the clot to the guide catheter. So if you're pulling this clot through less turns, because now you have a higher access, we felt that this was going to decrease complications of embolus to new territory. Also, because the catheter was now more appropriately right-sized to the vessel that we were in, we could often achieve flow arrest, especially if you were going to place this, not in this case, but if you were to get above the ophthalmic. It's felt that the collateral flow from the posterior communicating artery increases the incidence of emboli during these cases as you're integrating with thrombus. And so comparative studies that looked at these new intracranial 088 guide catheters and compared them to conventional guide catheters demonstrated that they were non-inferior, and interestingly, we found that we were getting to the clots on average about 9 minutes faster. And it wasn't a big evolutionary step then to go, hey, if we're approved to go to the terminal ICA with these guides and we're getting these benefits, and you often get clot in the terminal carotid or sometimes in the the close neighborhood of the middle cerebral artery, which is sometimes the same size or not much smaller, why can't we use this to go and grab the clot? We never had FDA approval, but we were doing it in the labs, and this is a patient of mine with an 088 guide catheter being placed over a 71 distal or a 71 large bore aspiration catheter in the middle cerebral artery. So people started looking at this, and this is a in vitro thrombectomy model that's looking at what happens if we put a large bore catheter in the middle cerebral artery and compare it to what happens if we put a super large bore catheter in the middle cerebral artery. I think this was the Millipede, which is an 088 super large bore catheter, and you have an ultrasound flow sensor that's measuring what's happening on a flow level within the middle cerebral artery. So when you put the large bore catheter inside this vessel, you see an immediately relative flow arrest, and you turn on aspiration and you get a big drop and then resumption of normal flow once you turn aspiration off. When you take the 088, okay, which is going to be more right-sized for the middle cerebral artery, as soon as you put it in, you get a significant greater degree of flow arrest. And then what happens when you turn that aspiration on is you get flow reversal. And that was potentially seen as a huge, huge benefit if you were going to use these to thrombectomize a middle cerebral artery. You can see if you're comparing utilizing these super large bore catheters within internal carotid artery and middle cerebral artery and comparing that to a large bore with or without a balloon guide catheter, you are getting superior recanalization in both anatomical regions, certainly better in the middle cerebral artery, but still a profound difference in the internal carotid artery. But you're also being afforded a significant degree of embolic protection, which is felt to be related to that flow reversal effect that had been demonstrated in the previous thrombectomy model. And similarly, this is Zoom 88. This is comparing what happens when you put the Zoom 88 within different sections of the internal carotid artery and then as well as the middle cerebral artery, and compare it to a balloon guide cath in the cervical internal carotid artery. And what you're seeing is similar or significantly improved decreased in flow within the middle cerebral artery. The Zoom 88 is approved as a guide catheter in the United States. It does not have FDA approval for mechanical thrombectomy. My center is currently involved in the imperative trial where when we enroll patients, we have to use the Zoom 88 as a guide, and we are encouraged, if clinically feasible, to put that catheter in an internal carotid terminus or middle cerebral artery and thrombectomize. So it's essentially the goal of the trial is to look at the safety and efficacy of using the super large bore catheter as a thrombectomy tool. So we know that companies were trying to increase this force applied to the clot, which is equal to the vacuum pressure in the tube times the tip surface area. So one way to do that is just make a bigger catheter, right? But you're going to be constrained by the size of the vessel that you're putting this in. You can't put a 4 millimeter catheter in a 2.7 or 3 millimeter middle cerebral artery. So what Imperative did was they gamed it. They, instead of increasing the OD, all right, which could affect this tip surface area, they beveled the tip. Okay, and when you bevel the tip, you increase the surface area, and what they found was that they provided a 15% greater clot engagement area. And there was a retrospective trial that looked at beveled and non-beveled aspiration catheter use, and what they found was that with the beveled approach, there was a greater first pass effect, there was less use of stent retriever, and the patients had better recanalization, and they also had improved outcomes of lower modified Rankins on discharge and at 90-day. So this slide kind of depicts the differences in both the technique and the philosophy between a traditional adapt technique and what we're talking about now, which is super large bore ingestion of clot, or what some people call SLIC. So what we were doing before with adapt is crossing the lesion, placing a catheter that wasn't right-sized for the vessel. There's space, there's antegrade flow. We're just grabbing the tail of the clot, and then we're pulling this thing down while there's flow. And so you had a lot of free clot that is being affected by these forces of flow, and it left a lot of the thrombus exposed to risk of fragmentation and emboli, and likely with a lower first pass effect. And that's very different from what we're trying to do now, which is put something big, it's right sized to the vessel, okay? We're stopping an antegrade flow effect, and we also know that we're reversing flow. So the goal here is to get there, stay there, get the job done, and not go back again. It's to treat it right there, right now. And so the hope being a higher first pass rate, and I wouldn't say the elimination, it's not my slide. I've seen that it doesn't eliminate this, but a decreased incidence of fragmentation to uninvolved territory, and hopefully better clinical outcomes. So, this slide's called How I Do It. I think a more honest title would be, this is how I'm beginning to do this most of the time. This is a 56-year-old female who's presenting with the right hemispheric stroke syndrome. We've got some early infarct signs. We use Viz.AI, and it's showing a distal MCA occlusion. This is the CTA. She's young. She's got a pretty kind arch. And if we look at her bifurcation and internal carotid artery, it's a little bit on the smallish side, and pay attention to that. And so my philosophy here, as I said, is to gain purchase, and I don't want to leave. This is a battle I'm in, and if I gain territory, I want to keep it. So, for years and years and years of doing kind of what we call a triaxial technique, I'm moving a little bit more to placing a sheath in the cervical carotid, and that's going to be my carotid placeholder, which means nothing's going to move me from here. And this case will hopefully kind of show my point. And so, just so you understand, when I'm doing these, if I wasn't using this, to get my devices there, I would be using a short 8-French sheath. So I'm putting an 8-French sheath in this person anyway. So to me, why don't I gain access to this incredibly important real estate and not move from there? So sheath is placed in the cervical internal carotid artery. Through that, I'm doing my internal carotid cerebral arteriogram. We see a cutoff in the MCA that correlates with the middle cerebral, the CTA. And just note what we're seeing here. We're in the venous phase, and she's got a kind of a smallish cervical carotid artery. So this 8-French sheath, and I see this a lot, is essentially acting as a balloon guide catheter, right? I've got stasis in the vessel. So without even getting my super large bore catheter, I've already got an element cutting off this flow. So I've got my 8-French sheath in the carotid. I use an 8-French 80-centimeter shuttle, and this is what we call a quadraxial system. So this is one component. So now, as I'm doing this, my tech is setting up my triaxial system. So I have my, in this case, I'm using the Zoom system. So this is a guide catheter, right? But my goal here is not to use it as a guide catheter, it's to use it as a super large bore aspiration catheter. This ideally is going to be my workhorse if I can get it to the brain. Through this, I have my large bore catheter. So this is a 71. This is a 35, which is used to treat these distal occlusions. This is an aspiration catheter. So this is, all these catheters are from the Zoom aspiration platform. This is a fairly sizable catheter. This is not something that I'm going to put a stentriever through. I like to use this because it's going to be better matched to the Zoom 71 than a smaller microcatheter, and it's going to take that ledge effect away that I hopefully won't get hooked on something like the ophthalmic as I'm going up there. So these are just better matched for me. When our techs open up our stroke system, it comes with 3 infusion catheters. And so everything is hooked up to flush except my Zoom 35. So my shuttle's hooked up to flush. All my catheters except my microcatheter are hooked up to flush. This is going to take time. And so you don't want to rob the patient of this time. Plus, I don't want angry techs looking at me when I ask for a new line. This catheter and wire are going to go in, and they're going to come out. All right? It's just designed to get me there quickly. I'm using a lot of this micro wire, the Aristotle. This is a big wire in the neuro world. It's an 024. And this provides a lot of support. Remember, I'm trying to get a guide catheter into the brain. And so I really want a beefy wire. I find that it's very torqueable, and I find that it's also very atraumatic. So to me, this is a safe wire, but it really has a lot of support. So basically, this whole system is kind of marched up. And it's kind of like a shuffling. You know, I'm going to move up a little bit with my microcatheter and microwire. I'm going to gain some purchase. And then I'm going to march my 71 up. And I'm going to gain some purchase. And then I'm going to march my 88 up. So you're just marching components of the system up towards your target in sequential fashion. Ultimately, I want to first start off with my aspiration catheter, which is a Zoom 71. And so here in my left hand is the 88. My Zoom 71 over here is at the clot, but I actually, so, you know, when do you turn these things on? You know, and I don't know if we all do the same things. We have different beliefs and habits about what we do. My habit is that I actually turn the aspiration on when I'm in free-flowing vessel. So you can see I'm getting some blood here. That's not the clot. I turn it on right when I'm close to the clot. It also provides me a tactile feel as to what's going on, because when you turn, so it's a visual and a tactile feel. I turn the aspiration on, I'm seeing blood, I'm in free vessel, okay, a little bit proximal to this. I advance it, and you get, it's an auditory, visual, and tactile feel. Like you're seeing blood, blood stops. When the blood stops, you often hear this, okay? And when you're feeling the catheter, you actually feel that kind of vibratory component of meeting clot, all right? My Zoom 88 is fairly high. It's in the kind of the terminal internal carotid artery. I like to get it above the ophthalmic initially if I can. So this guy is waiting, and now I'm interacting with clot. If you're lucky, you may engulf this and be done. Nothing's coming through here. I have not initiated aspiration through my super large bore catheter. But I'm in position, and now I'm going to advance my 88 over my large bore aspiration. So you can kind of see in the background here, this is the Zoom 88 that I've advanced to the clot, and I'm now beginning to withdraw the 71 back into the Zoom. My aspiration through the Zoom 88 has been turned on as I'm coming into the middle cerebral artery, and what I'm doing is it's like a relay race, right, where you pass the baton. The 71 is being pulled, and it's passing the baton, the clot, to the 88. Now the 88 owns the clot. And this is where I'm going to try and do this super large bore ingestion of clot and get the work done here. So I'm not a very good salesman. This is supposed to be, you know, a lecture on super large bore aspiration. You know, so you're supposed to win the battle right here, right? So I'm going to sell something else. Yes, this works, but in this case, I'm selling the importance of that carotid placeholder. Again, if you're lucky, you're going to ingest the clot, and it happens. It really happens. You often have to wait and be patient. This is not necessarily going to be instantaneous, but often, as in this case, there's a little bit of blood because you turn this on. Well, there's a little bit of blood, but this is not free flow. I haven't ingested the clot. Sorry, this is the, yeah, so sorry. I've now actually moved my 71 aspiration to my shuttle. So I'm kind of always got aspiration going on through any of the devices that are in the circulation. So once that 71 is out, I move my aspiration to the shuttle. And this is an important step. And it was taught to me by, I'm going to use the laser, this guy right there. He doesn't take credit for things, but he taught me this, and I think this is one of the most important things I've learned. If you don't have free flow, after some time, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, you're going to start to take this out. And you still may not have blood coming back, okay? Now, the adapt habit was to just keep on pulling this out, right? It's just keep on pulling it out. And now think, if I don't have the carotid placeholder, right, what's happening to this catheter? I'm pulling it out. I'm pulling it out. So if you've got your 8-French sheath, okay, fine, you'll pull it out through the sheath. But guess what? This is a 9-year-old with a horrible arch, and you don't get everything. You got to regain that territory that you just fought really hard to get. So that's, again, why you want the carotid placeholder. But when you get to the terminal carotid, sit and wait. Sit and wait. You're now in an area where you've got some flow, and that changes the physiology of what's going on. Typically, if you wait here long enough, what's long enough? You know, 30 seconds, a minute and a half. I think within a minute and a half, I often find that you suddenly get that, and the clot, you can sometimes see it come through, you feel something different, but if you look at your tubing, you see blood. So often you can just clear it out right here, and if you've ingested it, I actually do pull a little bit lower, and I do a control injection through my super large bore catheter to check things out. So again, let it sit in the terminal carotid, and often you'll see this resumption of flow that can tell you, okay, we've ingested the clot. So again, just a reminder, look at things. Look at your tubing. This is a patient where, you know, you can see the clot coming back. Look at your canister. I always aspirate my catheter. You know, even if you think you've got it and you're seeing blood, clean this guy out. Do not just inject. So I aspirate. So again, yeah, you want to fully ingest it, but, you know, life doesn't always respect your plans, and you can have this, right? Where you've corked the clot, even with a large bore catheter, and now you see the importance and wisdom of having that sheath in the carotid, that carotid placeholder, because if you have something like that, you're taking it out of the body, and you've still got a sheath in the carotid that you can evaluate, okay? And if it's not open, you have purchase within the real estate to go back up. But in this case, injecting through the shuttle, having had to take this out of the field, we've got a wide revascularization with an aspiration, a first pass effect. And I think this case was a 9-minute case. So now we're seeing something. Not that this was a full ingestion, but again, these cases can go pretty quickly where, you know, with ADAPT, we were happy to get like 30, 40-minute cases. The 070, 071 catheters come, and we were really excited to get 17, 20-minute cases. It's not that unusual to do cases from puncture to recanalization in kind of that 10, 12-minute range. So a look at some things to come. This is Route 92's triaxial, system, not yet at least selling, where I live, but it involves, again, as I said, three components: an 8-French base cam sheath, and a catheter extender, which is super large bore, and then it's got a very soft catheter insert. And this is kind of like a system on a stick. You just advance this up, to the side of the clot. So this isn't this, you've got this quadraxial system and you're moving two things up and then following it with another, device, that kind of shuffle technique that I was talking about earlier. This is literally take it with one hand and move it up, get to the clot and then feed the high point, 088 super large bore catheter over the tensing. Tensing comes out, and then aspiration is initiated through the high point and base camp, which is essentially kind of like a single construct. The aspiration occurs through both of these devices. So a retrospective study looked at 33 patients, and impressively, 100% of patients had this device delivered to the site, and they had an incredibly high first pass effect. Now to move in a totally different direction, it looks like penumbra potentially is moving in the other direction. We're all talking about, super large bore ingestion of clot, and they're actually, I think, maybe moving towards something smaller. And what their gig is to use a microprocessor called Thunderbolt. It's situated between the catheter and the aspiration pump. And what it does is it alternates between exposing the catheter to a deep vacuum and then, ambient pressure, which causes an agitation at the catheter clot interface. So, this is what we're, typically used to, this corking of the clot and waiting. And this is a very different process where this agitation is occurring at the clot. And so to me, it's an interesting thing that the people that kind of brought us aspiration is everyone has, joined the party and said, hey, this is great, and let's try and get as big as we can. They suddenly go, oh, you know what? We're going to maybe go the other direction, but throw some other technical evolution into the mix. So the good thing is we are in an opportunity to see where all of this goes. So I'm excited, and I hope you guys enjoyed the talk. And it's great being here. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Is there any questions?
First of all, I would like to thank to you for your presentation and bring to us a new device for the treatment thrombectomy for the stroke patient. And do you, according to your presentation, I have some questions. Is when in case patient with stroke not due to thrombus, is due to the thrombus institute arteriosclerosis. When you advance the large bore aspiration catheter too far, it can cause damage the vessel. How do you think about it?
Yeah, you can damage vessel anything. And I think it's important to know what your goals are, or have the right goal. And the goal is not put the largest device that you have available. It's to right size the device. And so it's more that you want to think about catheter vessel ratio. fast, but you can also be dangerous doing things fast. I think it's right-sizing, getting a system that in and of itself is a safe system, you know, paying attention. Another thing that I do is I mag up, and I don't know what system you have, but I have different doses of fluoroscopy. You know, when I'm doing flow diversion, when I'm doing stroke, I mag up, I go high dose. You know, I put it, many cases are occurring, right, from puncture to recan, 10 to 20 minutes. Make sure you see things. Stent treaters, I mean, the classic thing is, you know, working fast, you go ahead and put the stent treater in. I mean, I have somebody looked up and deployed a stent treater unaware. You know, so don't go too fast for your eyes and brain. Set things up nicely so that you mag, you can see things well. And again, just catheter systems that fit well together, that are necessary for mag.
Thank you. And the second question is, in your presentation, your word is the success in the first part when you use the last board aspiration catheter. But when you advance the A8, you many steps to advance to the internal cavity. And how about the benefit or the neutral to recanalization time for just the old aspiration catheter and compared to the new 088 last ball aspiration catheter in the jaw to the puncture to the recanalization time.
Yeah, a very excellent lecture, Prof. Darren. Do you think that Aristotle wire is very important to bring this big catheter to MCA 024 because we don't have in our country? Unlikely.